What if your family's biggest secret wasn't hidden in old letters or whispered conversations, but in plain sight, hanging on the living room wall? What if, from one day to the next, that family portrait that had always been there disappeared? Without a trace, without explanation, leaving behind only a cryptic note. The truth cannot be hidden forever? Does it sound like a scene from a movie? Well, this story really happened. And it's not just about a lost painting. It's about identity, memory, and what truly defines who we are. The Millers, residents of a quiet town in Massachusetts, have always been the kind of family that inspires respect and admiration. Traditional, close-knit, full of stories shared around the table. But the disappearance of that portrait revealed much more than a mystery. It exposed old wounds, forgotten names, and an emotional legacy that no one was prepared to face. A simple stolen painting became an uncomfortable mirror, revealing secrets kept for generations, and even voices from the past that refused to be silenced. Get ready for a real and exciting journey that goes beyond curiosity, a plot about empathy, reconciliation, emotional intelligence, and the transformative power of truth. This story will stir your emotions, make you question what is really hidden in your family tree, and maybe even inspire you to revisit what was left in the past. After all, every portrait tells a story, but only a few have the courage to show everything they carry. In the quiet town of Lenox, Massachusetts, where time seemed to move slower and stories were still passed down from generation to generation around the table, lived the Miller family, known for their unity and their tradition of Sunday dinners. Always with loud laughter, great-grandmother's recipes and stories that mixed love and wisdom. They were the picture of stability. And that portrait, by the way, was right there in the main room, carefully framed. In the center of the wall, among memories and heirlooms, the painting that showed the faces of 4 generations of Millers was more than decoration. It was a living symbol of affection, trust, and continuity. It was there that everyone's eyes rested when they needed to remember who they were. Until, one ordinary day, that anchor disappeared. There was no noise, no broken window, no sign of a break-in. Just a deep void in the space where the portrait used to be, as if it had vanished into thin air. And in its place lay something even more disturbing, a yellowed note on aged paper in firm, ancient handwriting. The message was short but incendiary. The truth cannot be hidden forever. Charles Miller, the patriarch, stood still. His wife, Helena, felt a shiver run down her spine. Grandmother Margaret clutched the crucifix between her fingers as she had done when she was a child. That small piece of paper carried more weight than many books. It was as if it had been written in invisible ink from generations past, filled with understanding, fear, forgiveness, and a veiled warning. The routine of the house, previously marked by kindness and tranquility, was replaced by tension, theories, and an uncomfortable silence between the walls. Emily, the youngest granddaughter, asked innocently, "Is the painting sad with us?" That phrase, spoken with childlike sincerity, resonated stronger than any adult speculation. Insecurity set in. They began to check doors, windows, cameras, everything in search of a logic, but there was no logic. Only an enigma that, even without showing its face, already stirred every emotional layer of that family. And little did they know this would be just the first thread pulled in a web woven with initiative, wisdom, and buried truths. The next step? Understanding how each member of the Miller family would react to this unexpected call from the past. The disappearance of the portrait caused an invisible but profound shock among the members of the Miller family. Each one reacted differently, revealing more about themselves than about the mystery itself. Charles tried to rationalize. He said that perhaps it was some kind of joke or mistake. Helena, on the other hand, was overcome with fear, fearing that something more sinister was happening. Emily, with the lightness of children, drew the picture from memory and stuck it on the wall, as a pure gesture of compassion and hope. Margaret, the soft-spoken matriarch with a gaze that seemed to cross time, was the first to spark the spark. This reminds me of something. When I was a girl, there was a similar case. My mother used to talk about a portrait that disappeared with the past. The phrase, spoken almost like a legend, created an atmosphere of reconnection with untold stories. That subtle clue led Charles to decide to involve the police, not out of fear of crime, but out of respect for the strangeness of the facts. And while the officers asked questions, collected fingerprints, and searched the perimeter, Helena had a bold idea: to take the note to the local college where they knew Professor Andrew Beckett, an expert in linguistics and American history. The result of the analysis was unexpected. The professor was intrigued. The note used terms that had fallen into disuse by the 1950s, such as hidden revelations and family dishonor. It was as if someone was trying to communicate something with words that no longer belonged to everyday language. This was not just a note. It was a fragment from another time. And whoever wanted to understand it would have to delve into that past with humility and initiative. As the days passed, the Miller house was filled with questions and emptied of answers. Dinner conversations were no longer about Emily's school or Helena's recipes. Now they revolved around hypotheses. Was it someone in the family trying to get attention? An old acquaintance wanting to revive hurts? Or something even more inexplicable? Margaret, with her silent wisdom, seemed to carry answers that she preferred not to say, as if protecting peace were more important than revealing pain. And in everyone's hearts, a feeling began to pulse that this was not just an isolated event. It was an ancient calling, an emotional adventure that could only be understood with emotional intelligence, perseverance, and above all, a willingness to listen to what the silence was trying to tell. And this silence would soon begin to manifest itself visually. Charles, determined to find any concrete clue, decided to check the security cameras installed in the neighboring houses. It was with resilience that he reviewed hours of recordings, waiting for any unusual movement. Until, on the morning of the disappearance, at 2:47 a.m., a figure crossed the field of view of the camera of the house next door. The figure seemed to float. It was not running. It was not walking. It just glided, blurred, almost translucent. It was impossible to make out its face, clothes, or features. But there was something in its presence that caused a shiver. The understanding that this was not just any intruder fell like an icy wave over Charles. At the same time, neighbors began reporting unusual noises that night. Whispers coming from nowhere, cracking wood, and most curiously, an intense light emanating from the living room window, right where the portrait used to be. Emily, wide-eyed, said that morning she had dreamed of someone trying to get out of the painting. A man wearing old clothes who called her in a soft voice as if he already knew her. The scariest detail was that she described the same time the figure had been recorded. Coincidence? Maybe. But for the Millers, the line between dream and reality was beginning to blur. It was in this context of fear and fascination that Margaret, touched by a wave of affection and intuition, decided to search through the city's records in the small local public archive. Among the yellowed papers and forgotten folders, she found something that changed everything. A name that stood out in documents from the 1940s, Jonathan Whitmore. He had lived in that same house with his wife and children. And according to the records, he had disappeared along with his entire family without a trace. The connection with the Whitmores seemed absurd at first glance, but something inside Margaret told her it was no coincidence. Jonathan Whitmore. The name echoed with disconcerting familiarity. According to the newspaper at the time, he was a visual artist, known for portraying families in an almost symbolic way, hiding subjective truths in his works. Jonathan's last record was in a municipal census from 1943, shortly before his disappearance. Since then, neither he nor any member of the family has been seen again. And at that moment, among papers, ghosts, and diffuse memories, the Millers began to realize that the search for the lost portrait might, in fact, be a search for something much greater, reconciliation. And the only way forward would be to go down to where it all began. Driven by curiosity and the force of something that no longer seemed just a mystery, the Millers decided to explore the basement of the house, a place rarely visited and always avoided, as if they instinctively knew that there was more there than old boxes and dust. Amidst old furniture, broken toys, and photo albums torn by time, Helena found a wooden box, closed with a simple latch. Inside lay a dark-covered diary with the initials J.W. hand engraved on it. The musty smell mingled with the subtle scent of dried ink. Margaret, her hands trembling and her eyes brimming with emotion, opened the diary. The pages revealed deep, almost poetic notes, written with pain, insecurity, but also with cutting sincerity. The author spoke of a cursed portrait, one that imprisoned truths that could not be revealed in life. Jonathan's description matched, in disturbing detail, the painting that had disappeared. He mentioned colors, expressions, the position of limbs, even a detail in the lower left corner, a brooch that Helena had always found odd in her great-grandfather's image. But what chilled everyone's spine the most was one sentence: "This painting will still be made, even if decades pass. And when it is, it will reveal what everyone fears, not what is hidden, but what has been forgotten." It defied all logic, all the linearity of time, all the emotional structure of the family. How could someone in 1943 describe a painting that would only be painted in the 1980s? The answer was not on the pages, it was between the lines. And what they said was clear: the past had not finished its cycle. And now, it demanded its conclusion with compassion and a kind of ancestral justice. Emily, who was observing everything with attentive eyes, asked if that meant the painting was magical. Margaret, with a sad and serene smile, answered, "Maybe. It only carries what we did not have the courage to say." The answer echoed. That discovery transformed the portrait from a stolen object to a symbol of overcoming. Now the search was not just about finding the painting, it was about deciphering it. What did it reveal? What was trapped there? Jonathan's words, buried for so long, now came back to the surface with force. There was something or someone trying to prevent a truth from being revealed. But there was also an opposing force, driven by love, reconciliation, and inspiration, trying to ensure that this truth would finally come to light. And it was time to find out which of the two would win. The next step would come from the most forgotten root of the family tree. The revelation of the diary ignited a new sense of urgency and curiosity in the Miller family. With the help of Thomas Hargrove, a local historian with a passion for family lineages and archives, they delved into baptismal records, wills, court documents, and old newspaper articles. That's how they discovered something that would completely change their perception of who they were. Jonathan Whitmore was a distant ancestor of the Millers, from a family branch that had been separated after a hushed-up scandal. The existence of an illegitimate son, a delicate but crucial detail. Someone, somewhere in history, had chosen to erase this blood tie, rearranging the family tree in the name of appearance and silence. A deep wound, camouflaged by decades of respect, tradition, and oblivion. The most disturbing part came with a high-resolution image of the missing portrait. Thomas used an ultraviolet light technique to analyze old photos of the family's living room and, to his surprise, detected a subtle face in the lower corner, a boy with a melancholy, almost imperceptible look. He wasn't part of the original composition. Or was he? It was as if it had been there all along, waiting to be seen. The feeling of emotion was immediate. Helena cried. Margaret, silent, held the photo with a mixture of guilt and reconciliation in her eyes. Emily, with her pure heart, said, "He just wanted to be remembered." That, although said naively, contained a poignant truth. The past never completely disappears. It only waits for the courage of the next generation to be seen with eyes of empathy, love, and emotional justice. The questions now took on a new tone. Who painted that detail in the painting? Why would someone include the face of a forgotten boy, but not talk about him? And why was it only revealed now? The answer seemed to lie less in technique and more in the power of consciousness. The portrait, as if it had a life of its own, seemed to respond to the feelings of the family, as if the truth would only reveal itself when there was enough understanding to embrace it without judgment. Jack, the artist uncle, commented, "Maybe it's not the painting that changes. Maybe it's us who, by changing inside, begin to see what was always there." And with this new mindset, the focus of the investigation would now turn to Emily's dreams that seemed to be connecting past and present in ways no one had ever imagined possible. Emily, the youngest of the Millers, began to show subtle but undeniable changes. During her nights of sleep, images that did not belong to her reality would appear: antique furniture, period dresses, voices echoing in hallways she had never visited, at least not in this time. In all of her dreams, there was one constant: a man with kind eyes calling her by an unknown name. "Eliza," he would say tenderly. At first, everyone attributed it to the girl's fertile imagination, or perhaps to the stress of the tense atmosphere that surrounded the house. But when Emily began to describe, in startling detail, the process of painting the missing portrait, including the type of brush, the arrangement of the easels, and even the position of the mirrors used for lighting, the family stopped to listen. With more attention, respect, and a new kind of initiative. Intrigued and somewhat alarmed, Charles and Helena sought the guidance of a hypnotherapist known for his delicate work with family, trauma, and conscious regressions. During the session, Emily entered a state of deep calm. Her words took on a different cadence, as if a part of her were accessing memories she had never consciously experienced. She described the house as it was in 1940 with uncanny accuracy. She named people no one had ever known, and she detailed a specific moment, the moment when the forgotten boy was left out of the first version of the portrait. Emily, or Eliza, as she began to respond during the regression, cried as she recounted the moment she saw a face disappear under dark brushstrokes. It was as if she carried not only the memory, but the feeling of someone who witnessed a silenced injustice. The effect was devastating. Helena, Margaret, and even the hypnotherapist left the session in silence, overcome by a rare kind of emotion, the kind that only appears when the soul touches truths too deep for logic. Emily was not just a sensitive child. She was a bridge, a living key between times, bearer of a rare emotional intelligence, capable of absorbing and translating ancestral pains with courage and purity. The family began to see her with new eyes, not as an enigma, but as a chance to heal, to rewrite, to include. And if art was the stage where truths wanted to dance, the portrait might still have more to reveal. The next step would be to find it, and when they did, it wouldn't be where they expected. The night the storm hit Lenox with unusual force, thunder tore through the sky as if the weather itself were manifesting itself. As the family gathered, something inside the house seemed to vibrate. A subtle sound, almost a whisper, came from upstairs. Emily was the first to hear it. She followed that sound with the calm and courage of someone who knows there is something waiting to be seen. When she reached the attic, she pushed open the old wooden door with difficulty, and there it was, the portrait, covered in a thin layer of dust, resting on an old trunk as if it had never left there. But it was different, very different. Now, on the right side, where before there had been only shadow, the face of an elderly man appeared clear, serene, and strangely familiar. Margaret ran upstairs when she heard Emily's call. When she saw the painting, she put her hands to her mouth, and tears fell without asking permission. She recognized the face. It was her father, a man who had died long before the painting was made, a man whose name was rarely mentioned because his story was shrouded in pain, regret, and silence. "He's not here by chance," she said with a trembling voice. "He wants to be remembered." That appearance in the portrait seemed to carry more than memory. It was a manifestation of reconciliation and love, a truth that finally found space to breathe. The painting had not only returned on its own, it had been transformed. And along with it, the family was also beginning to see themselves with new eyes. What had previously been an absence had now become a restored presence. The return of the Maigre portrait brought a wave of understanding and emotion to the house. What had been seen as a simple disappearance was now revealed as a layered revelation, and there was still much to discover. Charles suggested examining the painting carefully. Jack, with his artistic skill, noticed that there was something beneath the paint, as if that image had been painted on top of others. It was impossible to ignore that something or someone wanted this story to emerge slowly, respecting the emotional time of each member of the family. The painting was not static. It was a living organism, a reflection of the Millers' collective emotional intelligence. And now, the question was no longer who took it. It was, how many layers of truth are still hidden here? And for that, there was only one way to find out. Take the painting to a restorer and let the past reveal itself. The restorer Jack recommended was a meticulous gentleman with a slow voice and an attentive gaze named Lorenzo Della Cruz. He had a studio in the city's historic center, where he restored forgotten works with the same patience with which one rescues memories. When he saw the Miller's portrait, Lorenzo spent long minutes in silence, analyzing each layer of paint as if he were listening to ancient voices whispering through the colors. With the help of special lights, solvents, and an almost ritualistic technique, he began to reveal what was hidden. Underneath the image of the current family, old layers emerged. Faded faces, absent smiles, eyes that had never been noticed. It was as if the painting carried an emotional time capsule, a sequence of versions superimposed in the name of oblivion. Each face that emerged was accompanied by a question: who were they? Why were they hidden? And who, over the decades, had repainted them? Lorenzo, with his discreet wisdom, offered a disturbing hypothesis. Someone, at different times in the history of this house, has decided to hide faces, not out of hatred, but perhaps out of shame or out of fear. The frame, when removed, yielded an additional clue, a small, almost invisible signature engraved in the lower corner. P. Whitmore, 1951. Charles and Margaret froze. It was the same last name as Jonathan. The link between the emotional layers of the family and the hidden history was beginning to take shape. It was as if the painting had a guardian, a silent painter, who tried to balance the truths that the family could not bear. The portrait, now half peeled, was a tapestry of faces and feelings. And before it, the Millers were more united than ever. The pain of the revelation was real, but it was accompanied by a strange gratitude. After all, they were being invited, not forced, to learn about their true origins. Helena said with tears in her eyes, "It's as if we were restoring ourselves." Emily touched the newly revealed faces with affection, as if they were old friends. Jack, visibly moved, murmured, "Now I understand why art is truer than words." The painting was more than memory. It was compassion transformed into image. And the name of P. Whitmore, lost for decades, now became the next key in the journey, a piece of the puzzle that would lead everyone to the last and most delicate secret of the Miller lineage. With the name P. Whitmore in hand, Charles and Jack delved into the records of local artists from the 1950s Their search led them to an archive of the old Massachusetts Art Association, where they found an exhibition catalog. There he was, Peter Whitmore, a painter renowned for his melancholic works, always focused on familiar subjects, with imprecise faces and ochre tones. The catalog stated that he mysteriously disappeared in 1955 after a period of isolation. Further on, in a section of personal letters, they found something even more surprising. A letter sent by Peter to the Lenox City Council, never opened, still sealed. With special permission, the letter was accessed, and the contents were heartbreaking. Peter confessed something that would change everything. He was Jonathan's real father. The letter, written with poignant honesty, mixed pain, remorse, and a sincere request for forgiveness. It said that, having been rejected by his family, he chose to hide behind art, painting, erasing, and repainting the same image, in the hope that one day, someone would be ready for the truth. "If you are reading this," the last line said, "it is because the time for reconciliation has come." This was not just a rant. It was a confession that spanned decades, driven by silent love, profound humanity, and the courage of a man who chose to express himself even without a voice. Helena clutched the letter to her chest as if to absorb its energy. Emily, watching with watchful eyes, whispered, "He just wanted to be part of the story." And indeed, the story was now complete, or nearly so. Behind the portrait screen, in a hidden cavity in the wood, they found another letter. This one was addressed to the future generation. In it, Peter said, "Not all inheritance is visible. Some must be felt. What we hide with shame, you can reveal with love." Those words sealed the cycle. The emotional time capsule that had been forming over the decades finally closed, not with pain, but with inspiration. The Miller family looked at each other as if for the first time. The weight of the past had been replaced by the lightness of truth. It was the end of one journey, but the beginning of another. Now they had to decide what to do with all this. And it was Margaret who suggested, with the wisdom of someone who had lived a long time and learned even more, "Let's show this painting to the world." And that was how the last layer of the story began to unfold in the eyes of others. The decision to display the original portrait, with all the faces visible, was not easy. But it was unanimous. For the Millers, hiding it would be repeating the mistakes of the past. Showing it was an act of love, courage, and profound humanity. The work, now restored and revealed, came to occupy a place of honor in the main room of the house, no longer as a simple symbol of unity, but as a beacon of understanding, altruism, and inherited wisdom. The story spread quickly, first in the neighborhood, then in local newspapers, and soon gained space on social networks, TV programs, and documentary channels. People were not only moved by the mystery, but by what it said about all of us, that behind every silence there is a voice waiting for empathy, that behind every exclusion there is a soul seeking reconnection. Visitors began to arrive from other cities, driven by curiosity, hope, or the desire to heal their own stories. The Miller house became a meeting point, a place of listening and inspiration. Helena prepared coffee for anyone who wanted to talk. Charles told the story with a sparkle in his eyes. Emily, now recognized as the bridge between times, distributed drawings and words of encouragement to those who were too moved. It was kindness in its purest form. It was emotional intelligence converted into hospitality. Margaret, always discreet, would tell visitors, "More important than discovering secrets is welcoming them." And this phrase even became a plaque at the entrance of the house. Art, previously hidden, was now an instrument of connection, of reconciliation, of collective healing. Because the truth, even when it scares, also liberates. And as the months went by, a certainty was consolidated in everyone's soul. The greatest legacy a family can leave is not money or property. It is the courage to tell the truth. It is the Example of assuming who one is with sincerity, even when this requires overcoming resilience and humility. The portrait was not just theirs. It was a mirror for the world, an invitation for each person to look at their own story and ask, what is hidden behind my frames? Which faces have I erased from my memory, and why? And if you have come this far, perhaps this story has also stirred something inside you. And that's when everything starts to make sense. Now tell me, what is the portrait hanging on your wall that perhaps needs to be revised? What is hidden behind the frames you built with unspoken words, silenced stories, or feelings that you never had the courage to show? Because, as we saw, with the Millers, it is not the painting that disappears, it is the truth that insists on appearing. And when it emerges, it can hurt, yes, but it also heals, frees, rebuilds. A family's greatest legacy is not in material goods. It is in the courage to face what has been forgotten and with love, transform it into wisdom for the next generations. Is it time for you to write your own letter to the future generation? To ask for forgiveness, to forgive, to say what has never been said? What would you reveal if you could remove the layers of your own portrait? How many voices still need to be heard inside you? The answer does not lie in time, it lies in your initiative. And it starts now. If this story touched you, comment below. Which part moved you the most? Share it with someone who needs to reflect on the power of truth. And of course, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us. Because here, each story is a mirror. And maybe you'll see more of yourself than you imagine.